I stood in front of that workshop door for 20 minutes before I could even lift the key. My hands were shaking so badly I thought I might drop it. It had been 3 weeks since I buried my husband Richard, and this was the one place he'd made me promise, no swear, I would never enter. For 37 years of marriage, I kept that promise. But now he was gone, and the executor had pressed that cold brass key into my palm with words that still echo in my skull. He wanted you to have this. I thought I was just going to clear out some old tools and lease the space to help cover the mortgage. I had no idea I was about to discover that the man I'd loved, trusted, and mourned was a stranger. And before I tell you what I found behind that door, let me know in the comments where you're watching this from, because what happened to me could happen to anyone, anywhere. And if you want to hear more stories like this, ones that'll make your skin crawl and your heart pound, check the description box below. You're going to want to stick around for this. My name is Eleanor. I'm 63 years old, and until a month ago, I thought I knew everything about my life. Richard and I met in 1986 at a community college in Iowa. He was studying carpentry. I was working toward a teaching degree I never finished. He had kind eyes, rough hands, and a smile that made me feel safe. We got married 6 months later in a little church outside Des Moines. Our life wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. He built furniture in that workshop behind our house. Custom pieces for local families, rocking chairs, dining tables, cribs for newborns. People loved his work. They said he put soul into the wood. I believed them. I believed everything. The workshop was a converted garage about 50 feet from our back door. Richard spent hours out there every day, sometimes late into the night. I'd hear the hum of his table saw, the rhythmic tapping of his hammer, the low rumble of the radio he kept on for company. He always locked the door. Always. Even when he was just stepping inside for a few minutes. And from the very beginning, he made the rules clear. I was never to go in there. Not to bring him lunch. Not to borrow a screwdriver. Not even to knock unless it was an emergency. He said it was his space, his sanctuary, the one place he could think clearly. I didn't question it. Maybe I should have. But back then, I thought respecting boundaries was the same thing as trust. We never had children. I wanted them, but Richard said he wasn't ready, and then the years slipped by until it was too late. I taught piano lessons from home to fill the silence. Richard worked. We had dinners together. We watched TV. We went to church on Sundays. On the surface, we looked like every other couple in our quiet neighborhood. But there was always that distance. That gap I could never quite close. He'd kiss my forehead and tell me he loved me, but there was a part of him I could never reach. I told myself that was just how some men were. Private. Self-contained. I told myself a lot of things. The heart attack took him on a Tuesday morning. He was out in the workshop, and I was inside folding laundry. I didn't hear him fall. Didn't hear him call for help. By the time I went out to check on him because lunch was ready, he was already gone. The paramedics said it was quick. Massive. There was nothing anyone could have done. I don't know if that's supposed to make me feel better. It doesn't. I keep thinking about how he died alone, surrounded by wood shavings and tools, in that place I was never allowed to enter. I keep thinking about how I should have ignored his rules and brought him his coffee that morning. Maybe I could have saved him. Maybe I could have known. The funeral was small. Richard didn't have many friends. A few guys from the lumberyard came. Some neighbors. The pastor said nice things, the kind of things pastors always say. I sat in the front pew and cried into a tissue, and I felt like I was mourning a man I'd only half known. After the service, the executor, a thin man named Paul with wire-rimmed glasses, approached me. He handed me a manila envelope with my name on it and that brass key. Richard left instructions, he said. He wanted you to have the key to the workshop. He said you'd know what to do. I stared at that key like it was a live grenade. I wanted to throw it away. I wanted to bury it with him. But I didn't. I took it home and put it on the kitchen counter, and for 3 weeks, I couldn't bring myself to touch it. Until today. Today, I woke up with a kind of clarity I hadn't felt since he died. The mortgage was due. The insurance money wouldn't last forever. I needed to make decisions. I needed to move forward. So I made myself a cup of coffee, walked out to the workshop, and stood in front of that door with the key in my hand. The paint was peeling. The padlock was rusty. I could hear birds chirping in the trees behind me, and the morning sun was warm on my shoulders, and I thought, this is it. Whatever's in there, I'm about to know. I slid the key into the lock. It turned with a soft click. I pushed the door open. And the smell hit me first: sawdust, varnish, something faintly metallic. I stepped inside. My eyes adjusted to the dim light. And that's when my heart stopped. Because there, in the center of the workshop, wasn't a table saw or a workbench. It was a wall. A wall covered in photographs. Hundreds of them. And every single one was of me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at this wall, this shrine, this thing I didn't understand. The photographs were everywhere. Pinned, taped, tacked in overlapping layers like some kind of obsessive collage. There were pictures of me from decades ago. Me in my 20s, standing in front of our first apartment. Me in my 30s, watering the garden. Me in my 40s, walking out of the grocery store. Me last year, sitting on the porch with a book. Some of the photos I remembered being taken. Richard had always liked photography. He'd bring out his old camera on birthdays or holidays. But most of these? I had no idea they existed. Candid shots. Secret shots. Me sleeping. Me cooking. Me staring out the window, lost in thought. There were dates written on some of them in his handwriting. Locations. Times of day. It was like he'd been documenting me. Studying me. And I didn't know whether to feel loved or terrified. I took a step closer, my legs unsteady, and that's when I noticed the rest of the room. The workbench was shoved against the far wall, covered in tools I recognized. His saws, his sanders, his clamps. But next to it was a filing cabinet. A locked filing cabinet. I felt a surge of something hot and desperate rise in my chest. I grabbed a screwdriver from the bench and jammed it into the lock until it popped open. My hands were shaking so badly I almost couldn't pull the drawer. But I did. And inside were files. Dozens of them. Each one labeled with a year. I pulled out the one marked 1986, the year we met. Inside were newspaper clippings. Articles about a missing woman in Iowa named Lauren Pritchard. She was 24. Blonde. She looked a little like me. The article said she disappeared after leaving a bar one night and was never found. There was a photo of her clipped to the page, and next to it, Richard had written in pen, "Wrong one." My stomach turned. I grabbed another file. 1989. Another missing woman. Sarah Connolly. Brown hair. Green eyes. Also looked like me. Also disappeared. Also never found. Wrong one, he'd written again. I pulled file after file, and every single one was the same. Missing women. Unsolved cases. Women who looked like me. And then I found the one labeled 1991. Inside was a photo of me. Just me. Standing outside the college we met at, smiling at the camera. And underneath in his handwriting were two words, the one. I dropped the file. I backed away from the cabinet like it was going to explode. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what I was seeing, what it meant, what kind of man I'd been married to. And then I saw it. In the corner of the room, behind a tarp, there was a trapdoor in the floor. A metal handle bolted into the wood. I walked toward it like I was in a dream. No, a nightmare. I grabbed the handle and pulled. The door lifted with a groan, revealing a set of narrow wooden stairs leading down into darkness. There was a light switch on the wall. I flipped it. A single bulb flickered on below. I could see concrete. Shelves. Something else I couldn't quite make out. And I knew, I shouldn't go down there. But I had to. Because after 37 years of not asking questions, I needed answers. The stairs creaked under my weight. The air grew colder as I descended. When I reached the bottom, I realized I was standing in a small basement, maybe 10 by 10 feet, with cinderblock walls and a bare concrete floor. There were shelves lining two of the walls, and on those shelves were boxes. Cardboard boxes, neatly labeled with names. I recognized some of them from the files upstairs. Lauren Pritchard. Sarah Connolly. Others I didn't know. My hands were trembling as I opened the first box. Inside were personal items. A driver's license. A wallet. A necklace. A hairbrush with strands of blonde hair still tangled in the bristles. I opened another box. Same thing. Different woman. Different items. Jewelry. Photos. A purse. And then I opened a box labeled Eleanor 1991. Inside were things I thought I'd lost years ago. My college ID. A bracelet my mother gave me. A diary I kept in my 20s that I thought I'd misplaced during a move. And underneath all of it, wrapped in tissue paper, was a lock of my hair. I don't know how long I stood there. Time didn't make sense anymore. I was dizzy. Nauseous. My vision was blurring at the edges. This man I'd loved, this man I'd shared a bed with, this man I'd mourned, he wasn't who I thought he was. He was a predator. A monster. And I was supposed to be one of his victims. But I wasn't. I was the one he kept. The one he married. The one he watched and photographed and documented like some kind of sick experiment. And I didn't know if that made me lucky or damned. I climbed back up the stairs on shaking legs and stumbled out of the workshop into the sunlight. I bent over and vomited into the grass. I vomited until there was nothing left, and then I just knelt there, gasping, crying, trying to understand what I was supposed to do. Call the police? Yes. Obviously. But then what? They'd investigate. They'd dig up our yard. They'd tear apart our house. They'd put Richard's face on the news and call him a serial killer. And everyone would know. Everyone would look at me with pity or suspicion or disgust and wonder how I didn't know. How I lived with a monster for 37 years and never saw it. And the truth is, I didn't. I didn't know. Or maybe I didn't want to know. Maybe I felt the distance between us and told myself it was normal because the alternative was too terrifying. Maybe I'm complicit just by being blind. But here's the thing. As I knelt there in the grass, wiping my mouth, staring at that workshop like it was a tomb, I felt something else start to rise up inside me. Something sharp and cold and furious. Because Richard was dead. He was gone. He'd escaped justice, escaped consequences, escaped everything. And I was left here, holding the weight of his sins, carrying the truth of what he'd done. Those women, those missing women, they had families. Mothers. Fathers. Sisters. Brothers. People who spent decades wondering what happened. People who deserved answers. And I was the only one who could give it to them. But if I did, my life was over. Everything I'd built, every memory I had, it would all be tainted. Destroyed. Unless I did something else. Unless I made a different choice. If you've ever been betrayed, really, deeply betrayed by someone you trusted with your whole heart, you know what I'm talking about. You know that moment when grief turns into rage. When you realize the person you're mourning never really existed. Stick with me, because what I did next is going to shock you. And if you're loving this story so far, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and check the description box below for more stories that'll keep you on the edge of your seat. You're going to want to see how this ends. I didn't call the police that day. Or the next. Or the day after that. Instead, I closed the workshop door, locked it, and walked back into my house like nothing had happened. I made myself tea. I sat at the kitchen table. I stared at the wall. And I started to think. Really think. About what I'd seen. About what it meant. About what I was going to do. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about discovering your husband was a monster. You don't just lose him. You lose yourself. Every memory, every moment, every piece of your life together gets rewritten in this horrible new context. That time he came home late smelling like gasoline? That time he had scratches on his arms he said were from the workshop? That time he insisted we move to this house, this isolated house with no close neighbors and a big backyard? It all means something different now. And I had to decide if I was going to let that truth destroy me, or if I was going to take control of it. I spent the next week going through everything. I went back into the workshop every day, forcing myself to face it, to understand it. I read every file. I studied every photograph. I learned the names of the women he'd hurt. Lauren Pritchard, 1986. Sarah Connolly, 1989. Jessica Brennan, 1985. Amy Whitman, 1987. 12 women total, spanning from 1984 to 1990. All of them missing. All of them unsolved. And then me. 1991. The one he didn't kill. The one he kept. I didn't understand why at first. Why was I different? What made him stop? But the more I read his notes, these meticulous, horrifying notes he kept about his process, the more I understood. He was getting old. He was getting tired. He wanted stability. He wanted to settle down. And I was young enough, naive enough, eager enough to love him. I was the perfect cover. The perfect disguise. A wife. A normal life. No one suspects the married carpenter with the nice smile and the quiet wife. No one looks twice. And it worked. For 37 years, it worked. He built furniture. He went to church. He kissed me goodnight. And no one ever knew. Not the police. Not the neighbors. Not me. He died a free man, a respected man, and he left me to clean up the mess. But the more I sat with that rage, the more I realized something. I had power now. I had information. I had evidence. And I could decide what to do with it. I could destroy his legacy. I could make sure the world knew what he really was. Or I could protect myself. Protect my life. Pretend I never opened that door. But there was a third option. An option that kept growing louder in my mind. I could do both. I could give those families answers and still control the narrative. I could be the grieving widow who discovered the horrible truth and became a hero for coming forward. I could rewrite the story. Make it mine. So I started planning. I wasn't going to just call the police and hand everything over. That would make me look complicit, or worse, suspicious. I needed to be smart. I needed to look like a victim too. Like someone who had no idea. I started by documenting everything. I took photographs of the workshop, the wall of pictures, the files, the basement, the boxes. I made copies of the newspaper clippings. I wrote down dates, names, details. I created a timeline. And then I started researching the families. It wasn't hard. Most of them had Facebook pages, memorial websites, old news articles begging for information. I learned about Lauren Pritchard's mother, who died 5 years ago still looking for her daughter. I learned about Sarah Connolly's sister, who became an advocate for missing persons. I learned about Jessica Brennan's father, who never stopped searching. These people deserved to know. But I needed to protect myself first. I decided I would find the evidence gradually. Not all at once. That would look suspicious. Instead, I'd stage it. I'd call the police and say I'd been going through Richard's things and found some old newspaper clippings that seemed strange. I'd act confused, concerned. I'd let them search the workshop. I'd act horrified when they found the basement. I'd play the role of the devastated widow who'd been deceived. And I'd be convincing because part of it was true. I was devastated. I was deceived. I just wasn't helpless. Not anymore. But before I could do any of that, something happened that changed everything. It was a Thursday afternoon, about 2 weeks after I'd first opened the workshop. I was in the kitchen, rehearsing what I'd say to the police, when I heard a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked to the front door and looked through the peephole. There was a woman standing on my porch. Mid-50s, dark hair, tired eyes. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her. I opened the door. "Can I help you?" I asked. She stared at me for a long moment, and then she said, "You're Eleanor, right? Richard's wife." I nodded. "I'm Diane Brennan," she said. "Jessica Brennan was my daughter. And I think your husband killed her." My blood went cold. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. How did she find me? How did she know? I don't understand, I stammered. She pulled a piece of paper from her purse and handed it to me. It was a printout of a Facebook post from a true crime group. Someone had shared an old photo of Richard from a local newspaper article about his furniture business. And underneath, someone else had commented, "This guy lived near where my cousin disappeared in 1989. Always thought he was creepy." The post had dozens of comments. People speculating. People sharing theories. People tagging the families of missing women. And Diane Brennan had seen it. "I've been looking into every lead for 30 years, she said, her voice shaking. And when I saw that post, something clicked. Jessica disappeared in 1985. We lived 2 towns over from here. She was last seen leaving a craft fair where a man was selling wooden furniture. A man who looked just like him." She pointed at the photo. "I need to know if I'm right. I need to know if he took my daughter. Please." I could have lied. I could have told her I didn't know anything, closed the door, and called the police right then. But I didn't. Because looking into her eyes, I saw something I recognized. Desperation. Grief. The need for truth. And I thought about all those boxes in the basement. All those names. All those families. And I made a choice. "Come inside," I said. "We need to talk." I told her everything. I took Diane Brennan into my living room, sat her down, and told her about the workshop, the files, the basement, the boxes. I watched her face crumble as I described what I'd found. I watched her hands shake as I showed her the photographs I'd taken. And when I told her there was a box labeled with her daughter's name, she broke. She sobbed so hard I thought she might collapse. I held her. This stranger. This woman whose life my husband had destroyed. I held her and let her cry, and I cried too. Because in that moment, we weren't strangers anymore. We were both victims of the same monster. And we both wanted the same thing, justice. But Diane didn't want to call the police. Not yet. "If we go to them now," she said, wiping her eyes, "they'll take everything. They'll lock it up as evidence. It'll take years to process. Some of those families might never get answers. We need to do this right. We need to contact the families first. Give them closure. And then we go to the authorities." I knew she was right. But I also knew it was risky. If we started reaching out to families, word would spread. People would ask questions. It could all fall apart. But I also knew I couldn't say no. Not to her. Not after what Richard had done. So we made a plan. Together. We decided we'd reach out to the families one by one, discreetly. We'd invite them here, show them the evidence, give them their loved ones' belongings from the boxes. Let them have that moment of painful, horrible closure. And once we'd contacted all 12 families, we'd go to the police together as a united front. We'd control the narrative. We'd make sure Richard was exposed, but also that the families got what they needed. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't legal. But it felt right. It felt like the only way to honor the women he'd killed. Over the next 3 weeks, we contacted 11 families. Some didn't respond. Some didn't believe us. But most did. They came to my house, one by one or in small groups, and I took them out to the workshop. I showed them the files. I gave them the boxes. I watched them hold their daughter's necklace, their sister's wallet, their friend's photograph. I watched them break down and scream and cry and curse Richard's name. And I stood there and took it. Because I deserved it. Because even though I didn't know, I should have. I should have seen the signs. I should have asked the questions. I should have protected them, somehow, even though I didn't know they existed. But there was one family we couldn't reach. Lauren Pritchard's family. Her mother was dead. Her father was in a nursing home with dementia. She had a brother, but we couldn't find any contact information for him. It haunted me. The idea that she might be forgotten. That her family might never know. So I kept digging. I searched online records, old phone books, social media. And finally, I found him. David Pritchard. Living in Oregon. I sent him a message. And 2 days later, he called me. "Is this some kind of sick joke?" he said, his voice hard and angry. "Because if it is, I swear to God, it's not a joke," I said. "I have evidence. Your sister's ID. Her jewelry. I know what happened to her. and I want to give you answers." There was a long silence. And then he said, "I'm coming there. Don't do anything until I get there." He arrived 3 days later. Tall, graying, with Lauren's eyes. He didn't say much. Just followed me out to the workshop and stared at the wall of photographs, the files, the basement. When I handed him the box with Lauren's name on it, he opened it slowly, like he was afraid it might explode. He pulled out her driver's license. Her necklace. A photo of her smiling. And then he looked at me and said, "How did you not know?" It was the question I'd been asking myself every day. The question that kept me awake at night. "I don't know," I said quietly. "I've asked myself that 1,000 times. And the only answer I have is that I didn't want to know. I was lonely. I wanted to be loved. And I didn't ask the questions I should have asked. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." He stared at me for a long time. And then he said something I didn't expect. "You're not responsible for what he did. But you are responsible for what you do now." And he was right. We called the police the next day. All 12 families came with us. We walked into the station together, carrying boxes of evidence, files, photographs. We told them everything. We showed them everything. And we watched as their faces changed from skepticism to horror to grim determination. They searched the workshop. They excavated the backyard. They found remains. For women buried in shallow graves behind the shed. For women who'd been missing for decades. For families who finally got to bring their daughters home. The story exploded. National news. Documentaries. True crime podcasts. Richard's face was everywhere, labeled as a serial killer, a monster. Our house became a crime scene. I had to move. I had to change my name. I lost everything. My home. My reputation. My past. People still recognize me sometimes. They whisper. They point. They wonder how I didn't know. And I let them. Because the truth is, I didn't know. But I should have. And I'll carry that guilt for the rest of my life. But I also carry something else. Letters from the families. Thank you cards. Photos of gravestones that finally have names and dates. Closure. It doesn't erase what Richard did. It doesn't bring those women back. But it's something. It's more than they had before. And in the darkest moments, when I wake up at 3 in the morning and see his face in my mind, I hold on to that. I hold on to the fact that I did the right thing in the end. Even if it destroyed me. Even if I'll never be the same. I'm 63 years old. I live in a small apartment in a town where no one knows my name. I don't date. I don't have friends. I spend my days volunteering at a women's shelter, helping survivors of abuse rebuild their lives. It's the only thing that makes me feel like I'm making up for lost time. For all the years I was blind. For all the ways I failed those women by loving the man who killed them. And sometimes, late at night, I think about that workshop. That door I was never supposed to open. And I wonder what would have happened if I'd never found that key. If I'd just cleared out the space and moved on. If I'd let Richard's secrets die with him. Would those families still be searching? Would those women still be missing? Would I still be living a lie? I'll never know. But I do know this. The truth destroys you. But living a lie destroys you slower. And I'd rather be destroyed by the truth than eaten alive by ignorance. So if you're watching this and you have a secret, a suspicion, a nagging feeling that something isn't right, don't ignore it. Don't tell yourself it's nothing. Don't wait 37 years like I did. Ask the questions. Open the doors. Face the truth. Because the cost of looking away is higher than you think. And the people who pay that cost are never the ones who deserved it. Thank you for listening to my story. I know it's not easy to hear. But it needed to be told. If you want to hear more stories like this, stories about survival, truth, and the complicated, messy, painful process of healing, check the description box below. And if this story moved you, made you think, or made you feel something real, leave a comment and let me know. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me your story. Because we all have secrets. We all have doors we're afraid to open. And maybe, just maybe, by sharing our truths, we can help each other find the courage to face them. My name is Eleanor. I was married to a monster. And I survived.